Hi, everyone. Welcome back to No Pad Answers. We're your hosts, Dr. Ray Sirvo and Allie Kilmery. This show will help you better understand the reliability of Christianity, the Bible, faith, and worldview. Here we believe there is no place for pat answers. And for those of you who don't know, a pat answer is a not well thought out, shallow answer. Tonight we've got a couple of good questions, so let's go ahead and jump right in.
Hi, Al.
Hey, Poppy.
So we're going to talk about theology tonight. We're going to talk about who God is, right?
We are going to talk about the attributes of God.
Okay.
And I have been reading The Knowledge of the Holy, and this has had a great impact on me. And what I have realized in reading this is that a lot of us may not know why it's important to have a proper understanding of the attributes of God. So tonight I thought we could ask some simple questions to just kind of get a good understanding.
Good. Yeah, I think it's very important to know what God is like. When I was doing my master's degree, I had to produce a course on who God is, and I ended up titling it "Who Are You, God?" just so that we could ask him the questions and find out. And it was a very, very good course. I mean, I had 10 lessons, and maybe we'll do some of that one of these nights too, or one of these days. Yeah. And I think probably to start with, just to think, first, let me just say, I think Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer is a must read. And I read that book. I can't remember how many years I did it, but I read it at least once a year. And for those who don't know me, I think a good book is any book I have to read at least twice. If I could read it once and really get it or not be hooked by it and interested in it, I don't think that's a good book. At least for me, it wasn't a good one. And so, yeah, a good book is one I have to read at least twice so I can get hold of it. And as I mentioned, I read Tozer's book, The Knowledge of the Holy, every year for more than, I would say, 5 to 10 years. Every year I would read it again. And every once in a while I go back now and I read it. I do a lot of listening. I listen to books on Audible, or Christian Audio is another app that you can get to do those things. And it just helps me get the knowledge of what's in it. And then I always usually buy some written copy, whether it's Kindle or I buy the actual book. But anyway, so what's an attribute to start with when we look at the attributes of God? What do we mean by attributes? And an attribute is something we ascribe to God. And that's all we can do. We can only ascribe something to him. We attribute something to him. That's where the word comes from, as an attribute. And it's important for us to understand what we're saying about God, and we should be clear. So when we look at the attributes of God, you have to go to the scripture, I think, originally, just to get some ideas of who God is or what God is like. And I don't want to go down too many rabbit trails here, but we could do it. We could go down lots of rabbit trails, because just reading through the scripture, we're looking back on thousands of years of biblical history, and when we do that, we impose what we think God is back onto the scripture. Mm-hmm. And it becomes clear to me that the Israelites didn't know the God that rescued them, that made promises to them. I'm sure that when they came out of Egypt, they just thought they had a God that was bigger than other gods. that he was just, stronger than other gods. They didn't know that. I know we'll talk about omnipotence and omniscience and those attributes of God. They basically just thought they had a God that was somewhat bigger than other gods. And that's why we give God names like the Most High,
Mm-hmm.
because that tells us we're comparing him to something, right?
Right.
If we're calling him the Most High, it means that there are some that aren't as high as he is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the right attribute for God that we attribute to him, but he's unlike every other spiritual being or material being for that matter. Yeah. So, what was the other question?
I think it's really interesting how you spoke about the Israelites, because I think we may not be so far off today as well. We just don't have a proper understanding, which plays into the rest of our lives, the rest of our faith. So the first question is why is it important to have a proper understanding of God's attributes?
Yeah, again, that's a great question to look at. Tozer says something in the beginning of his book that I think is really important. He says that no civilization or no society, I'm not thinking of the exact word, has ever risen above its view of God. So, in other words, theology, I'm jumping to a conclusion here. Theology really shapes a culture. What we think about God is going to determine how moral our culture will be, how much hope we have, how much vision we have. So that's a really important question, why it's important. And I think you can put that not just to a culture, say like Western culture or American culture, but you could take that on personally. You could apply it to your church. Your church will never go beyond its view of God. If it doesn't have a clear biblical view of who God is, it'll be limited as to how much it can do and even what it could do. And I think as individuals, it's the same thing. Your view of God is going to get you through difficult times, what you know about God and how much you trust God. And I guess that plays into that idea of the importance of who God is, because we only trust God as far as we know him.
Mm.
Yeah. So if we have a small view of God, we might think he's untrustworthy. If we think God changes, if God acts out of his feelings, and what happens if God has a bad day? What do you do when God has a bad day? Those are important things to know about God.
Yeah.
So we have to learn to seek God and to know God. And really the underlying theme of the Bible is that Jesus came to take us back to the Father. So the whole purpose of the Bible leads up to the Gospels, and then we get the clarity of what God was doing by sending Jesus to us to bring us back to the Father. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And people love to quote the first half of that verse, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," and try to, I guess, get something out of it. And there's a lot to get out of it. But the second half of the verse tells you, "No man comes to the Father without me."
Except through me, yeah.
Yeah, you can't do it without him.
Mm-hmm.
So his purpose there is to bring us back to the Father, which we lost that in the garden and
Mm-hmm.
have a terrible time with that. Yeah, and
Yeah,
without Jesus.
it's
Yeah.
really powerful. If we took the time to really dive into this, it just blows my mind how much it could affect your faith when you really start to begin to know God's character, his attributes, that he's just never changing.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's just really okay. You want to go on to the second question?
Sure.
Okay, so the second question, which you kind of talked a little bit about this, is how does knowing God affect your faith?
Yeah,
And you
well,
said something, I hope you say it again because I can't remember what you said word for word, but it was very powerful. So just go ahead and if you say it, I'm going to stop you and try to highlight it.
unpack it. Yeah, good.
Hmm.
So, what we think about God really determines how we're going to live. What we know about God is going to determine how we live. What we believe about God, the difference between believing in and believing that. I believe that God exists, but when I start believing in his existence, it changes the way I live. Believing that he exists is just something that I do up here in my brain.
Hmm.
But when I believe in it, I put my faith in it. That's the difference. And some people think faith is blind. They how many times you hear somebody say, just believe. Well, believe what?
Hmm.
Believe God's in control. And what do those things mean? But we want to have a clear view of God. We want to have a biblical view of God and see him as the cause of all things that are made, whether they are seen or unseen. Paul tells us that in Colossians chapter 1, that God's the author of all those things. And when we start seeing that, our faith grows. The more you know God, the more you're changed. Um,
Yes, I'm thinking about the parable of the seed sower, about how the seed is thrown on different
Different soils.
surfaces and how the roots are affected by it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it comes down to good soil.
Hmm.
When you have good soil, that's where all the fruit comes. And what's unsaid about that parable, it's really important too. What's unsaid about that parable is that you can cultivate your heart. You can cultivate the soil of your heart. You could make it more receptive and be more open to know God, because it's the difference between being selfish and selfless.
Mm.
And that's where the fight is all the time in our life. Do I want to be in control, or do I want to give God control? And
Yes,
so,
are we going to die to ourselves and take up our cross every
exactly.
single day?
Yeah. Sometimes every moment of every single
Of-
day.
that is
It's not just
true
every,
for me.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's every decision we make. That's what being discipled is all about. Is if we want to be his disciple, we've got to do this. And so that comes in with knowing who God is. And you don't you get to know God through his interaction with you, things he does in your life, things you see in the scripture. And it is a relationship, but it's that relationship must be based on a good theology that is a
Yes.
revelation of who God is.
So you're creeping into our third question right now,
I am
which is how can we learn God's attributes?
well, a good
Let's
way,
say you're, yeah, let me just start with saying, let's say you're talking to a newer Christian or someone who's just coming into their faith
right?
and they're like yearning for a deeper understanding of who God is.
Yeah, well, there is the idea. Well, you read some good books like Knowledge of the Holy. That'd be good. But the other one is to ask questions. If you're a new believer coming into it, ask questions of people who are substantial in their faith. They have a good walk with God, and they'll help you understand more of what God is like. The other thing you could do is go through the scripture and pick out the parts that talk about what God is like when David says of God, you're from everlasting to everlasting. Well, what does that mean? You know, how do you go from everlasting to everlasting? Well, that's a euphemism. He's saying something that really is beyond words, that he has no beginning and he has no end, where we get the concept that God is eternal. In other words, he's outside of time. He's not bound by time. And you can find those, especially in the Old Testament, you can find those attributes of God in the way that he deals with Moses, the way he deals with Abraham. You know, for God to be the creator of heaven and earth, we know right off the bat, he's extremely powerful, more powerful than anything else that we know. If he's made everything that we see, and David says, the heavens declare, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament shows his handiwork. Well, it tells us that there's something to see about God in those things. So we can start there. And the thing of it is that God expects us to seek him. So, and you want to seek him through the pathways he says, like when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father. So there's something, or not just something, but Jesus shows us the Father. He shows us the reality of who God is. And so we can see so much of the Father in him, his mercy, his stand against evil, the emphasis he put on his word. Those things all give us some understanding of who God is. So I would say, at least those three things, read good theology. Knowledge of the Holy is a great place to start. You could chew on that for a pretty
A
long
long time.
time. Yeah.
This will keep you busy for
Yeah.
some
Knowing
time.
Knowing God by J.I. Packer is a good source. When we were talking the other day, I thought of the Puritans. The Puritans had a very, very good view of God. They had a very biblical view of God. I don't always agree with all their applications, but that's okay. I can
Mhm.
still see something about God in that. And the other thing is to ask questions, to ask people. It's okay to question things about God. Why did God do this? Or why did this happen in the Bible? All those things are really important for us. So,
Yeah. I think it's important that new believers know that God is not offended by our questions or intimidating or, there's no shame in asking questions. But I do think as a newer Christian that finding groups that are really good, you mentioned making sure that you're asking questions to someone who has good, strong walk with Christ can be a little bit difficult.
right.
But yes, luckily we have resources like this and other things on the internet. We just have to be discerning in what resources we are turning to.
Yeah. And, even like this, what we're talking about now is just scratching the surface.
Barely.
We could delve into some of the attributes of God in another session. We could do that as well. I haven't been keeping track of time, so I don't know how far we've gone. Or
I think we're right on target for our questions for this evening.
okay,
So I think we did really good. There were a couple of really good points in there. I think your answer to the first question was really good. I think the answer to the second question was even better.
okay, good,
I will go back and play when you publish this video, I will go back to the second answer and write it on a sticky note.
okay. Yeah, I have to remember what I said. See, I'm just trying to think of what it was.
You just keep going and more good things just keep coming out.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, do we want to close and just say,
Yeah, I think that was good for our touching on the attributes of God. And I think, like you said, the next time we go into, we'll talk about his omniscience and some other attributes that we hear frequently about him. Get a good definition and a better understanding.
sounds good? So I'll let you close.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you guys so much for watching and for hanging out with us. As always, if you do have a question that you would like us to talk about, you can always send us an email, or you could just drop your question in the comments below. Thanks again for being here with us tonight. We love doing this, and we hope to see you again soon. Until next time.